I hope we can provide some useful information about the logic and the practice of risk assessment, and also the legal aspects of what you're supposed to be doing. I'm Philip Crisp. This is my wife, Eva Crisp.
Hi.
There's also our son, James Crisp, who looks after the computer side of RiskAssess. And there's our daughter, Mia, and she is a science teacher and has provided us with invaluable advice on many occasions. Now, so you can guess that this is very much a family business, RiskAssess. Now, the slides for this presentation will be available from the RiskAssess website, and we'll show you at the end where you can go to find those. Now, it's a bit tricky to answer questions during a Zoom, so please, if you can save up your questions, we'll do our best to answer them for you at the end. Anything else? That's basically it. All right. Okay, now, can you see the first slide, the first of the PowerPoint slides?
Yes, yes.
All right.
We can go to the second one then.
We can go to the second one then, yes. Oops, hang on, no, we've got to go active, have that, yeah.
No, it just jumped.
Did it? Okay, let's try again. Okay, let's go to the second slide, which is the logic of the whole process. It's a really good idea to think about things before you do them so that you and other people don't get hurt. I mean, I guess that is the logical starting point. Now, the term risk assessment is a general term for, first of all, working out what could go wrong, which is a matter of identifying the risks, if you want to put it in a formal way. Then deciding how bad it would be, which is assessing the risks, and then putting measures in place to stop bad things happening, which is the control of the risks. So in all of the literature on all the safety stuff, they talk about identify, assess, and control risks. Now, confusingly, the term risk assessment is used not only for the whole process, but also sometimes for this middle section of assessing how bad it would be. Okay, so you need to be aware of that confusion. In general, when people say they're going to do a risk assessment of something, they mean the whole process here, all three sections of it. Now, the law. In Western Australia, you have the Work Health Safety Act 2020. You have the Work Health and Safety General Regulations 2022. They are the core bits of legislation. The Act is the highest level instrument of legislation, and it provides the general framework for the whole thing. And then the regulations provide the machinery for how it's meant to work. Regulations often go on for pages and pages dealing with all sorts of specific situations. Now, these two are the central items that would be used in any legal action or any defence against legal action. Now, as well as that, there are codes of practice, and there's also Australian standards, which indicate, well, they are admissible in court, and they indicate what is known and what could reasonably be expected for people to do, for what would be reasonably practicable. The two codes of practice that are relevant here are how to manage work health and safety risks and managing risks of hazardous substances in the workplace.
Hazardous chemicals.
Hazardous chemicals in the workplace. Now, the Act. Okay, so this is the top level piece of legislation that you have in WA. It imposes a duty to eliminate or minimise risks to health and safety as far as is reasonably practicable, taking into account and weighing up all relevant matters, including the likelihood of the hazard or the risk concerned occurring and the degree of harm that might result from a hazard or risk. Now, although it was 2020 that the Act was passed, it didn't come into force until 2022 when they wrote the regulations to go with it. Now, there are a few points to be made from this. The first is that the good news is that you only have to do things as far as is reasonably practicable. Okay, so superhuman efforts are not required. Now, you however, do need to take into account all relevant matters, which is logical and also specified in the legislation. So, I mean, this means in a school type situation, in a school lab, you have to take into account all sorts of things like the facilities available, the behaviour of the student, students with allergies, students with special needs, whatever. It's all in there. You have to look at everything in carrying out your risk assessment. And when you carry out your risk assessment, you have to consider the likelihood and the degree of harm. The likelihood that the hazard or the risk concerned occurs, and the degree of harm that might result from the hazard or the risk. Now, the Work Health Safety Act imposes quite serious penalties for a person. You can go to prison for 5 years under the Act. There is a $680,000 fine for an individual and a $3 million fine for a corporation. There is also the provision for industrial manslaughter, which is following legislation in other states, where you can go to prison for 20 years and a corporation can be fined up to $10 million. So yes, that's like all other states except Victoria, where they have their own legislation, which actually does include industrial manslaughter. Okay. Now, new terms that you have to be aware of under the Work Health and Safety Act. The first one is the person conducting a business or undertaking, a PCBU, commonly known as a peekaboo. And the peekaboo is the principal, the school board, whatever is the top instrument of control for the organisation. Then you have an officer, who is any person who makes or participates in making decisions. Now, the way it is arranged is that they consider your level of responsibility in proportion to how much control you have over the expenditure of money. So if you're on the school board, then that can determine how much money gets funneled to individual schools for safety matters. The principal, of course, is going to have a lot of say in how money is spent within the school. Money would go down to a head of department who has to decide what he's going to spend money on. And then he or she, teacher, and then the lab tech. The lab tech generally has least control over expenditure and therefore would be seen as least responsible in this sort of chain of levels of decision making. The Act requires that people be proactive. Officers must exercise a thing called due diligence to ensure that the peekaboo complies. So everybody within the organisation, all the officers have to try to ensure that the whole organisation, in this case the school, is actually compliant with the legislation. Now, legal requirements. Yes, as I was saying, legal requirements are that RiskAssess must take into account all relevant matters, including facilities available, behaviour of the class, students with special needs, students with allergies, and so on. It'd be silly to have a requirement, not to have a requirement like that. You can't just ignore a student with allergies or somebody that's very disruptive in class or whatever. Everything has to be considered in a holistic manner. Now, since these matters vary from class to class, each class doing each experiment should be the subject of a separate risk assessment. Okay, because some classes may have a student who has, let's say, a severe allergy to peanuts. Another class might have a whole lot of behavior problems in there, so you don't want to give them scalpels or concentrated acids or other things that they might not do the right thing with. So each class is a separate entity doing each experiment. There are confusions. Now, we were in WA for the Canasta conference in July, and we were surprised to find a common view that some school staff think that risk assessments aren't required, that you can just have a simple discussion of risks, that is sufficient, and that you don't need to document risk assessments. Now, this was based on statements in the codes of practice, and those statements were taken out of context and for situations that are not applicable in schools. There is a very high duty of care that must be exercised in schools in safeguarding the students that are there. So we won't have time to go into that in detail, but we did produce a document, and I'll show you where you can find the thing in our learning resources, where we go into the details of the requirements that are imposed by the Act and the regulations, and we look at the codes of practice, the two codes of practice, and the examples that are given within there, and analyse the appropriate course of action on the basis of that. So we can discuss that further if you like. Now we come to the, I guess, obvious question.
Did you want to talk
So
about science assessment?
Yeah, okay, all right, go back one then. Yes, we should say here that not only are there the legal instruments there, but there are other opinions. And the Australian Science Teachers Association, through Science Assist, also recommends that a site-specific risk assessment be carried out for all science practicals. So that is, if you like, the professional body for the teachers recommending that. And the legislative interpretations throughout Australia are very much that you need to do risk assessments. The same legislation exists in all states and territories in Australia except for Victoria, and it's very clear in all of those other states that schools need to do risk assessments of their science experiments. Anyway, we'll show you where that document is later, and we can have a look at that. So why do risk assessments? Well, the obvious one is to reduce injuries. I mean, that's the big thing. We hope that by carrying out a risk assessment, you'll identify things that could go wrong, put control measures in place, and that means that somebody doesn't get hurt. There is a secondary purpose, and that is to increase legal protection. Since by law you're required to carry out risk assessments, if something does go wrong, then you have a sort of a level of legal protection. You could, in court, under oath, say, Your Honour, I did my very best. I did a risk assessment and it wasn't good enough, but I did as good a job as I could. And that then means that the person, the blame would pass upwards through the system, because the answer to that is, of course, that person should have been given greater training so that person would have been able to identify whatever it was that the risk was that led to an injury. So it provides a significant amount of legal protection if you carry out a risk assessment to the best of your abilities, and you document that so you can show, if necessary, in a court of law that you did the right thing.
You might want to say you have worked as an expert witness as well.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I should say I've done quite a lot of expert witness work for courts. Yes, it's actually been, it was very interesting, and that involved a lot of chemical injuries. And yes, the expert witness is required to go through and identify places where the activities carried out were not consistent with legal requirements and present those to a court. It's only a court of law that can assign negligence on the basis of failure to do a sufficient number of things that you were meant to do. But an expert witness would itemise all of the things that were not done according to legal requirements.
Next.
Okay, now, if you look up any text on doing risk assessments, then the standard thing is you need to identify your risks, you need to assess them, and you need to control them, which is what I had in the first slide as well. Before you do that, you need to establish the context. I mean, the who, the what, and the where. You need to, after you've finished, you need to monitor and review. At every stage in this process, you need to be consulting and communicating with people. Now, risk assessment, to assess the severity of a risk, you need to consider the consequences of the event and the chance it will occur, the likelihood. So consequences and likelihood. So those two are combined formally in a thing called a risk matrix, which can be anything from 3 to 3 to about 5 by 5 with different levels of consequences and different levels of likelihood in a sort of a matrix. And you can decide what assign to each of those a particular severity level. So the severity or the risk level for an activity can be low, medium, high, or extreme. And we won't go into all this stuff on risk matrices in this session, but if you go to the RiskAssess learning resources, we give you details of this and we show you the different risk matrices that are used in different organizations. Now, to assess the risks, you first of all assess the risks, and if the severity of the risk is low, it's a low risk level, then you can basically go ahead and do the experiment. The low risk level is relative to the inherent level of risk. Sorry, it's a risk level without any control measures in place besides the routine procedures. So in a school lab, you'll have rules, routine procedures that you're not allowed to run, you tie hair back, you have enclosed footwear, maybe some people want you to wear a lab coat, you don't eat in the lab. There's a whole lot of routine procedures for a lab. So if those are sufficient to deal with the risks involved in a particular experiment, you have a low risk level and you can just go ahead and do things. However, if they are not sufficient, if we have a medium level of risk or higher, then you need to add control measures. And then once you've added the control measures, they become part of the experiment. And you can then you can then consider the experiment with the control measures in place. You go back up here and assess the risks. And now, if there is a low level of risk with the control measures in place, you can go ahead and do the experiment. If it's not enough, then you've got to go back and think about it and add some more control measures. So the idea is you go around this loop, theoretically anyway, adding control measures till you reach a stage where the experiment with the control measures in place is low risk level, and then you go ahead and do it. Now, if you can't do that, then you do not do the experiment. Now, the sorts of controls that you can put in place are, first of all, the elimination of things. So, you can get rid of, let's say, use of potassium metal because it's a pretty tricky material to handle and very violently reacting with water. So you can get rid of that. You can also consider that as a substitution where you would use some other material like sodium. But substitution, you can substitute, let's say, a barium salt for a lead salt if you want to do a precipitation of a metal sulfate. You can isolate things from the people who might be injured. So you can, in simple case, you can lock the door to the laboratory so that it is isolated from the students when they're not meant to be in there in class. So you shouldn't let the kids go wandering into the lab. There are engineering controls, which are things like a fume cupboard, blast shield, various other engineering things you can do. There are also administrative controls whereby you can prevent people from going to places where they shouldn't go at times that are not appropriate.
Policies and procedures.
They would be, yes, policies and procedures. And then at the bottom of the list is personal protective equipment, which is a very valuable adjunct to these other control measures because it provides a backup to some of the other control measures. So if you wear safety glasses, it means that if something does happen and things squirt everywhere, then it can protect your eyes. which are the most critical part of you. So it's common to have personal protective equipment as an addition to other control measures as a last resort. So what is RiskAssess? RiskAssess is a web-based risk assessment tool. It is customized to the school situation. It's not designed for industry. It provides electronic templates that follow the Australian ISO standard on risk management. It gives you database information on risks for chemicals, for equipment, and for biological items. Then, as well as that, there's an equipment ordering and lab scheduling system. There's a labeling system, which allows you to do labels according to GHS, which you're, of course, required to do according to the Work Health Safety Act. And we provide you with a lot of learning resources, which we hope you find valuable. Another aspect is there's easy sharing of experiment templates for customization. We're saying that you need to do a separate risk assessment for each class doing each experiment. That would be, well, virtually impossible without some easy way of doing it. And RiskAssess does provide you with that, because you can easily make a modifiable copy of an existing experiment and then adjust it and customize it to the particular circumstances of the new location and a new group of students. The logic is that there are separate sections for teacher and laboratory technician. The reason is that the teacher is responsible for what happens in class and has to control the risks for that. And the laboratory technician is responsible for the preparation of a kit beforehand and cleaning up afterwards. So they have two different roles and have to do separate risk assessments for their particular activities. There is an initial assessment of inherent risk, which is, remember, the risk level with no other control measures in place besides your routine procedures, which is safety glasses, don't run, hair tied back, etc. Now, if your initial assessment reveals a low severity of risk, then you can go through basically to the end of the risk assessment without having to do much more. If it's medium or greater, you need to introduce control measures to your experiment, and they become part of the experiment, and hopefully you can get the experiment down to low risk with the control measures in place. If the inherent risk level is high or extreme, then you need to have a third person who hopefully is experienced and can sensibly review what you are proposing to do and the control measures to be put in place to see that it's okay. It's always good to have an extra pair of eyes looking at something. Now, there is cross-checking by the teacher, the lab tech, and sometimes for high and extreme risk situations by a reviewer. There's a scheduling system, an ordering system, a labeling system to save you time. These are not actually part of the risk assessment process, but they are very useful adjuncts, and people generally think that they are very worthwhile. The RiskAssess software is inexpensive. It costs you $350 plus GST per campus per year, which is, well, what the cost of a few bottles of chemicals may be delivered to the school. RiskAssess is an electronic system. It's relatively rapid. It provides prompts that are sensitive to the context. So you can reduce paper consumption if you're comparing it with a paper system where you have lots of blank spaces that just aren't relevant. It's easy to review and update your risk assessment since they're all electronic documents. You have very easy monitoring and you can extract statistics about what's been going on. It's also very easy to store the documents because you are required to store the documents, the risk assessment documents, basically for the lifetime of the people involved. There is, by law, well, the law has a thing called a statute of limitations, which is 7 years. So you might think that you can throw them away after 7 years. But the problem is that in courts of law throughout Australia, the statute of limitations is routinely waived in cases where the plaintiff is unable to know about what is happening until the effects become apparent. So let's say if you got mesothelioma and you worked 40 years ago in a submarine where they had bits of asbestos lagging around all of the pipes, then you could not have known you were going to be getting mesothelioma in 40 years' time, and therefore you're allowed 7 years from the time you become aware of the problem to make a claim in a court of law. So in effect, since a lot of chemical effects lead to cancers many, many years later on, you really need to store these risk assessments for the lifetime of the people involved, which is actually quite easy to do if you store them electronically. It is also, RiskAssess is demonstrated to work in schools. Currently, we have 2,700 schools using RiskAssess in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. There are 9 million risk assessments stored on our system, and 26% now of the high schools in Western Australia are using RiskAssess. So, yeah, we can say that this is not just something that's starting up at new. This is a very well sorted out, established system. Details, you have access from school, home, anywhere with an internet connection. There's nothing to install on computer, tablet, or phone. You just have to go to the website, and the website is update. You have instant update of web pages. The next time you go to them, you'll see the new version. It allows an unlimited number of simultaneous users and risk assessments. There is minimal data entry. Now we'll show you that in a way later on, but we've arranged it so that you only really need to put in the who, what, where for the experiment. And then when you put in keywords for bits of for chemicals or equipment, whatever, little pop-out lists allow you to select what you want. And then this is all put together into a big structure, which we'll show you later on. RiskAssess complements the safety data sheets. We do not include safety data sheets because they are the proprietary information. They are the intellectual property of the companies that produce them. And you're already required by law to have a safety data sheet available from the manufacturer or supplier wherever a chemical is stored or used. We have continuing input from science staff. We have multiple backups of our data. We've got a backup server as well. So if anything should go down, it hasn't gone down for a very long time now. But we don't guarantee that we will store your data forever. We do our very best. The amount of time that we spend on trying to secure the site that our users just never see is enormous. And we've never had any data loss or any hack so far. But we recommend that schools make their own backups of the data and store it in the school record system. We provide you also with support and advice. People send us emails all the time, and sometimes they ring us up and we have a chat to them. We do our best to try to help you. Now, the advantages of RiskAssess are that, first of all, you can have proper consideration of risks and control measures. It's a formal way of doing it. You can have standardization between schools. In most parts of the country, well, I think we've got 88% of all the high schools in Australia are using RiskAssess. So most teachers now, if they move from one school to another, go from one that's using RiskAssess to another one using RiskAssess. So it's pretty easy for them to fit into the system, and it's all just, oh yes, we've seen that before. We have storage of records for legal purposes. As I said, we have them stored on our system. We've never lost anything since we started in 2008. But we do recommend that you make your own backups of all the risk assessments at regular intervals. We help with the communication, I think, between teachers and laboratory technicians, because the teachers can specify a particular experiment and give all the details of what is needed, and the laboratory technician can see when that's going to happen on the schedule and can prepare things for it. A less obvious advantage is that it discourages spur-of-the-moment experiments. If you look at the history of injuries in schools, a lot of them have been the result of spur-of-the-moment experiments where people get a good idea and go racing off and grab a few chemicals and things and start mixing it all up. It's very difficult to do that. Well, you can't do that if you've got to do a risk assessment beforehand and consider the risks. It's also very useful for new and inexperienced staff because you can say, you know, this is the system that we are following here. Outcomes, we hope that we see a reduced frequency of injuries to students and to school staff. There are reduced costs for paperwork, litigation and payouts. I mean, if something does go wrong in a school, if there is a serious injury at a school, it is a really enormous event. The amount of paperwork, all the legal costs, and it's just horrible for the people who are involved. The next outcome we hope is compliance with the law, because it's sort of, you know, nice to do things in a legal way, especially in a teaching institution. It helps to maintain the variety of chemicals and equipment. We hope that by people assessing the risks and you know, sensibly putting in place control measures, they can avoid the drift towards salt, sugar and water experiments that we're seeing in some places, where people are just choosing chemicals that don't have any hazardous properties because they're too worried that it might lead to an injury, and therefore they just go back to salt, sugar and water. If that happens, then it greatly diminishes the learning experience for the students, and most importantly, even more importantly, they probably won't go on in science and chemistry in particular. If it's a chemical one, then they won't go on because they'll just see the science is so boring. But if they can do interesting, fun pracs, then hopefully we can keep them and they can go on to further studies in it. There's compliance with the West Australian curriculum, which requires that all these risk assessments be carried out, even by the students as well. And it represents best practice according to law. I think that since 88% of the high schools in Australia are using RiskAssess, then it would be seen in a court of law as being what is known as best practice. The sorts of things that you can do with RiskAssess. Let me put away like that one. We have RiskAssess is a normal entry point, I guess, for most schools. It's used for science. We have 2,700 schools using that, as I think I mentioned. WA, there are 92 schools using it, 26% of all the high schools. Student RiskAssess is a version of RiskAssess designed for the students themselves, and there are all sorts of good tools there to make it easier for the staff to manage large numbers of student risk assessments. We have 600 schools using that, only 2 in WA, but we hope we will get more. Primary risk assessment. Oh yes, IB schools have to use that. I don't know how many IB schools there are in WA, but the International Baccalaureate requires that students do risk assessments of the experiments that they design themselves. Primary RiskAssess is a simplified version of RiskAssess for primary schools. And then there's the latest offering is RiskAssess for food tech. We've created a version now that is for anything to do with food and cooking. And so we've got about 100 schools using that, and at last count, only 1 in Western Australia, but we hope for greater things.
We've got 100 schools around Australia.
Yeah, just a bit over 100 schools around Australia using it now. Now, oh, hang on, better be here. Okay, so we should go to a demonstration of this. We can show you all these legal bits and pieces, and then show you a little bit about how RiskAssess works. How are we going for time, Eva? We're going okay for time? All right, and then we'll have time after that, hopefully, for some questions. Okay, let's jump now to, I'm going to go to the other window. Ignore this for a moment. Ta-da! Okay, there we are. We have the home page for RiskAssess for this famous high school, EcoSolve High School. And we can show you, first of all, where to find the documents that we've been referring to. If you're a RiskAssess subscriber, then you just go up the top here and you click Help. But if you're not, then you can go to any RiskAssess page, including the landing page, and down the bottom we have Learning Resources. So we have, first of all, the law. There are legal requirements for schools to perform risk assessments. So that shows what is required in each of the states and territories of Australia. There is a review of risk assessment obligations under West Australian laws and code of practice. That's the one that we wrote in response to the fact that we heard people saying that they didn't need to do risk assessments. And then there's a specific document on the West Australian Work Health Safety Act 2020. So you can have a look at those. The legal requirements are fairly simple everywhere now, except for Victoria, is using the Work Health and Safety Act.
But Victoria is...
Sorry, I should say Victoria has their Occupational Health and Safety Act 2004, which actually imposes the same sorts of requirements there. It's not like they miss out on having to do risk assessments. There is the West Australian Work Health and Safety Act. We've got specific data on that, a summary and a full details here and explaining peekaboos and things like that and the references to the documents. And the one that we just produced recently is this one, Legal Obligations to Carry Out Risk Assessments of Science Experiments in Schools in Western Australia. So there we look at what is required according to the Work Health and Safety Act, according to the regulations, and according to the code of practice, the first one on managing health and safety risks, and then on managing hazardous chemicals in the workplace. And then we've got the legislative interpretations throughout Australia, what happens with virtually the same legislation in other jurisdictions, and professional advice from Australian Science Teachers Association, and a conclusion. So that's the document there. So that's the legal situation. Now, the presentation that we've just given today is down here. Here is STAWA 2025, Perth, WA. We gave it about an hour ago. We were doing the chemical waste disposal, and all the slides for that are available by clicking that link. And then risk assessments according to law, logic and best practice, that's the current one. And if you click on that, you can download all the PowerPoint slides that we gave you today.
But you're welcome to click on any of the previous presentations if you want to use them.
Yeah, I mean, all this stuff is available. We've got all the presentations that go back literally years and years. You're welcome to steal any slides from there that you like, and put into anything that you can use if you think it can help you to improve the safety in your school.
You don't need to be a
subscriber. You're not stealing them because it's actually made publicly available. So then there's all sorts of stuff on chemical disposal. We just looked at biological safety, a lot of stuff on chemical safety, a huge amount of stuff on that one if you're interested, and a logic and process of risk assessment. We've got things there, and yeah, we've got all sorts of other, we've also got videos and things here getting started. So that's in our learning resources. So let us go back then to the homepage. How many minutes have we got left, Eva?
So we've got 20 minutes.
20 minutes left. All right, that's good. Okay, well, look, I won't go through doing a whole risk assessment with you. That's the subject of other presentations. But if you pick one of the ones here that has been done, this is one on making hydrogen, and you can see all of the bits and pieces that go into the risk assessment. Nearly all of this is extracted. This is all database information that is extracted whenever you put in, let's say, hydrochloric acid 3 to 8 of a particular concentration in that range. It extracts all this information and puts it in there to provide you with background information for doing your risk assessment. At the end of all that background information, You have to agree that you've read and understood potential hazard stat handling procedures, and they've read and have copies of the safety data sheets. And then you go to the actual risk assessment itself, whereby you consider the risks of fire, explosion, chemicals in eyes, etc., a whole list of things. And then the teacher and the science technician separately certify that, or they separately do an estimation of the inherent risk level, and then they put in control measures if necessary. And again, it may be different for the lab tech compared to the teacher. And if it's low, it's commonly low risk for the lab tech because there are more things going on in a classroom than for the lab tech. And you sign all these and it becomes an electronic document that is stored within the RiskAssess system as a PDF file. And you can download all those PDF files as a zip file of all of the risk assessments for a particular period of time, typically a year or half a year.
So once it's a PDF file, you can't change it.
Yes, yes.
So from the legal point of view.
Yep, it's a key point that, yeah, once you've stored it as a PDF file, it is immutable and it is a legal record and you can't fiddle with it. And the court of law would be able to be easily convinced that you couldn't change it. Okay, let's go back here. Then there are other fun things. There are scheduling systems. I don't know what we've got in here. We don't have any experiments in the 4-week range there, but we have.
Do 1 week, maybe.
Sorry, we can do.
What do we put in?
No, we don't. There are different dates.
Yeah.
We can show you the labeling. Now, if you want to do labels for things, in most cases, most of the chemicals you'll be wanting to label will be done with standard labeling, and what that does is it extracts the information from the chemical database and plonks it onto a label for you. So if you want to do a label for, let's say, sodium hydroxide, so you can just type in lowercase NaOH. You've got a choice here of the solid or solution. You click the solution. You can then put in whatever molarity you want. Maybe you've got, I don't know, 3.5 molar solution. You might want to print, let's say you do 4 big labels. Then you can go down here, choose large. You can, would you like print borders on the labels? Yeah, let's have borders. Oh, you've got a choice of either putting borders on it for a paper label and you can cut them out, or you can use an Avery sized label sheet and then you can just peel them off. Anything else there? I think that should do the job.
You can do a mix of labels on the sheet.
Here we are. Here's your labels. You've got 4 labels for sodium hydroxide, 3.5 mole per litre that you can put onto bottles of things. So that's about as easy as we think we can make it for you.
So I think we'll be up to questions.
I think we're sort of getting there. Yep. All right. Well, shall we pass over to questions?
Yes, I have one question at the moment.
All right.
That's it. Hi, you mentioned earlier that you could extract stats. Could you expand on that in the RiskAssess? Is that correctly?
Up the top is a thing called tools.
If you're a subscriber.
You have to be a subscriber, of course, but once you're a subscriber, here are your tools. You've got billing, so you can check how much time you've got left on your subscriptions. You can synchronize subscriptions and so on. You can change contact details, change password, customize your year group list, because we know different places have different names for different year groups. Blocked out days for bookings, warning.
Like that's for holidays.
Yeah, that would be
sports carnivals,
all that sort of stuff.
Weekends.
Warning on short notice bookings. That's right. You can put in a message that says, you're too late. You're too late. Go away. Or you can put in something more conciliatory, like, please come and see me, and we'll try to do it.
That's if people put in their risk assessment too close to the experiment.
Yes. Number of groups or preparations. So I can change the set number of groups. You can customize your searching. You got backups. This is where you can download backups. Here's stock taking and usage. Now, I think that's what you were looking for.
Stats.
So this shows you a report for the last 3 years of everything that was used in terms of equipment, chemicals used, chemicals produced, or biologicals and food. So I don't know if you go to chemicals used, there probably won't be very much in here. That answers roughly.
That's the sort of stats you can
migrate trial, linked risk assessment,
so just hold on with so you can get a 2-week free trial, and any work that you did in your trials can be migrated to your, if you decide to subscribe, it'll be passed on and integrated with your subscription.
Yeah, that's the migrate trial risk assessment. So you can have a trial, even 2 trials, and migrate your risk assessments to a continuous.
So you don't lose the work.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could you, am I able to, like, I was thinking of stats on how many pracs that like our school would do. Is that something that's possible in RiskAssess?
Yes, if you go, I haven't set this up really for showing it, but you can go to laboratory scheduling for any dates, and you can get a listing of all the schedules for any particular period. So you might pick all of last year, let's say, and you can then extract the data, and you can export it as a CSV file, and then you can put that into Excel and work on it.
And the other thing, say you wanted to know how many risk assessments done by a particular teacher, you can use this search section and put in the teacher's name.
Yep.
And what period of time you want to have it, and they'll list out all the risk assessments that they've done over that period that you've designated.
Yep, there are various ways that you can do that sort of thing. If you want to do these curly sorts of things, drop us an email, and James is the best one for explaining this since he wrote all of the code for it, and he will tell you the way that you can do it. But you can extract a lot of information from this.
Yes, as a long-term chemistry teacher, okay, I want to do a risk assessment. I want to do something, slightly off the books. Let's make an ester, for example. I'm going to need some butyric acid, perhaps some octanol, some sulfuric acid. I'm going to be using some water baths. Got 30 students in the class. I want to start a risk assessment from scratch. What sort of time frame are we looking at for me to go through it all, assess it, do it, get it signed? Is it like half an hour? And another question on top of that is, do you have standardized labs with standardized risk assessments, which you just basically sign at the bottom?
Okay, so there's 2 questions there.
2 questions. Yeah, let's do the first one. Yeah, I'll give you an experiment.
Yeah, that's
How
fine.
long would it take?
I don't think we've got time for me to actually go through and do your experiment, but it would only, if you know what you're actually going to be doing and you've got the chemicals and things around there, it'll only take you a few minutes to put the thing into RiskAssess and get the RiskAssess form created. After that, you then need to send it off.
Well, you have to assess the risk.
You need to then that creates the form, and then you've got to actually figure out what you're going to be putting in the way of control measures. That is, and I think should be, the main time wasting component, but it's not a waste if you actually stop somebody getting hurt. And then after that, it will automatically go into the scheduling system. If the lab tech is looking at the scheduling system on a regular basis, he or she will see it pop up, and then they can do their bit to assess the risks of what they need to do, and then it is basically done. So,
well, then the lab tech has to, you sign that you're certified that it's of low risk, and the lab technician has to prepare the things and clean up. So they sign for that, for their risks involved there.
yeah.
And they usually low unless they need control measures. And then that's basically it. In terms of standard, you always have to customize it for your class, taking into the into account the relevant matters. But that shouldn't take you too long.
Okay, so what I was thinking of was just using a standardized lab from one of the standardized textbooks, which we have across the nation.
Now that's interesting because we do have 3 ebook publishers who have inserted libraries for their experiments into RiskAssess. We actually take no responsibility for what they've done, but these act as pro formas, and you can download a copy, just make a modifiable copy of a pro forma for any of their experiments, and then you can customize that to the particular circumstances of your lab. So those companies are Style, Education Perfect, and Edrolo. I don't know whether your school uses.
I know Style. Yeah, we have Style. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there's a library. If you become a RiskAssess subscriber.
But is this for year 11 and 12? This is for lower school, I would presume, if you're using Style.
I think they stop at year 10.
Yes, that's right.
So all your experiments up to year 10, will be in Style, and then what happens is if you subscribe, you just have to tell us that you're a Style subscriber. We send a thing to Style, and they put a little number in there, and we set up and activate it so that you see all of you have a library within RiskAssess that shows you the experiments. So I'll show you here. So there's a library here. If you click on that, it says all, or you can also have a library of your best school risk assessments that people can use as a starting point for their own risk assessments. But if you subscribe to Style, a 3rd item will appear, which will be called Style. And you can look at that library and download copies of whatever it is that Style has put in there.
And then the other thing that you said if you were doing your Esther experiment, another day, you can create a modified copy of your experiment, of your risk assessment, and then just modify it for
the next class. So if you go to one of the experiments that we've got here, you'll see up the top here is create modifiable copy. You've only got to click that, and it will make a copy that is almost what you already had here, but it won't put in. I can put one in if you like. Let's click a modifiable copy of it. And it retains the author because the person who actually did it first deserves some recognition. The references are kept, but here the teacher needs to be inserted. You need to insert, if you use a training code, you need to insert the room, period, date so that you can, so it enters the scheduling system. Notes, you have to put a number of groups. And of course, you can modify anything in here that you want to change.
Okay. And we can save, like, if we've got a set of experiments that we use just on a yearly basis, we just save them all to your database and then just draw upon them for the next year as a modifiable lab.
Yeah, you would
assessment.
Your best school risk assessment library, and you would direct people to go there to make a modifiable copy of what was your best effort and use that as a starting point. Then to meet the legal requirement to review and update and improve things, you would go there at regular intervals, say at the end of each year, and have a little bit of roundtable discussion, and you can replace those best ones with a slightly better one again. And that becomes the new starting point for risk assessments the next year.
Okay, thank you. That's quite clear. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else with any questions?
I have one more.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
So my question is about a prac that's been signed off and saved as a PDF and then gets rescheduled for another date. So that gets recorded as having happened twice. So both, is that the case?
Yes. If you, again, I think you can record, I think it records the multiple reschedulings, yeah. So if you've got the making hydrogen one here, you can reschedule it to another date. You have to put in, you then change the date here, and it you have to sign that you are a person who is entitled to do this. So there's a record of who it is that changed it. Then there is stored a copy of the original experiment with a note at the top, a review note up the top saying that it was rescheduled from a particular date to another date. And the one then that you see normally in the system is the rescheduled one. And if you do it a second time, a second copy will be stored with the second rescheduling information from whatever the date was to whatever the new one is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, we're getting some.
Oh, sorry, I have one more.
Go for it.
Sorry, just to, as a lab technician, just to clarify with signing off on the risk assessment. So that risk is just entirely as a lab technician, not as to what the students are doing in the lab?
Correct. You have no responsibility for what happens in the class.
Unless you're involved in it. Sometimes
unless you're involved in it. Yep. I mean, or if you deliberately and knowingly provided a piece of defective equipment and electrocuted someone or something like that, you could be dragged in. But the teacher is the one at law in Australia who bears the it's quite huge responsibility for everything that happens in the class.
But often the lab tech looks what the teachers put in, and if they're not happy with it, they can say something to the teacher saying, well, maybe you should do this instead of that. And
yeah, that's what I've been changing or signing for myself, because they put it as low risk, but then I've been putting it as medium risk, thinking that they need to tick the box saying that they need safety glasses, but they see it as automatically standard that the kids put safety glasses.
Yeah. If your safety glasses are included in your routine procedures, and they should be promulgated everywhere. There should be, boards, signage and stuff saying what is expected of people in terms of routine procedures. Everybody should be aware of those. If you have safety glasses listed there that you have to always wear whenever something is going on, then you don't really need to put it as well into the risk assessment.
But people wanted it as a reminder that they should use their safety glasses. Yes. So that's why there's a tick box there. But you should not be really changing it for the teacher, for the teacher section. You're really signing off on your section.
If you change it then, if the teacher says it's low risk and you change it to medium risk, the good news is that removes the teacher's signature, and you can then send the risk assessment back to the teacher saying, hey, what about such and such and such and such that could occur? I think this is actually medium risk, and therefore I've upgraded it. Please check, let me know, and if you agree, then please re-sign it and send it back to me and put in these extra control measures. So it allows the lab tech to have input to whatever extent is desired.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's okay. Anyone else?
Other questions? I think we're all good.
Oh, good. Yep. Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for coming along. I hope that it's been useful.
And if you've got any questions, you can email us.
Yep. We're
team@riskassess.com.au. And and there's a 2-week free trial if you want to try it out. And you just write to us and we can sort that out for you.
Yes, we don't hide. We're very easy to find and we'll happily try to help you. That's about it. If you're not a RiskAssess user, then give it a go for 2 weeks and see if you like it, if it's useful for you.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks, Philip and Eva.
That's okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.